Hello, and welcome to Boring History for Sleep. Tonight, we are not visiting a king, or following a crusade, or charting the course of a great battle. We are doing something far quieter. We are going to try to sleep. Dim the lights and settle into your bed. Feel the comfort of your mattress, the effortless softness of your pillows, the gentle, even warmth that surrounds you. This is your modern sanctuary, a luxury so profound it would be indistinguishable from magic to the person you are about to become. Now, let your mind drift. Step quietly with me into the stony belly of a medieval fortress. It is deep winter. The year is unimportant. The cold is eternal. You find yourself dragging your tired boots across uneven flagstones, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Torches flicker along the walls, their flames burning brightly, but the light they cast seems thin, almost brittle. The cold does not retreat from them. It simply presses through the cracks of mortar and between the heavy stones, as if light and warmth never agreed to travel together. You pull your cloak tighter. The air is sharp enough to sting your nose and cloud your breath in front of your face. It's bedtime, here in a castle that has more drafts than doors.
You are a knight. Your days are spent in armor, charging across muddy fields, or standing a long, cold watch on the battlements. But now the armor is off, and you are faced with a different kind of battle, surviving the night.
You probably won't survive this. Not with your modern expectations of central heating and insulated windows. But still, you are going to try. The stone chamber around you smells faintly of soot, dampness, and a trace of old hay dragged in on someone's boots. No matter how grand this fortress looks from the outside, its towers thrusting into the night sky, banners stiff in the wind, the interior feels less like luxury and more like a refrigerator made of rock. The truth is, these walls were built for defense, not for comfort. The very thickness that keeps arrows out also locks in the chill. The massive stones don't trap heat. They store the cold like a vault. Archaeological studies of these great drafty halls confirm just how little insulation existed. Castles in northern Europe could easily see winter nights dip below freezing inside the very rooms where nobles slept. You sit on the edge of a rough wooden bed, feeling that deep cold climb through the soles of your feet and into your bones. It's no wonder that court records and letters from this time are filled with constant grumbling about drafts, frost, and sleepless nights. It is a strange thought that privilege in this world sometimes just means you get to freeze in grandeur rather than huddling in a small cottage near a warm hearth. The soundscape of your room isn't silence, it's restless. The wind sneaks through the arrow slits, moaning softly, like a forgotten choir rehearsing out of tune. Somewhere, a rat rustles. Even the smallest creatures are seeking warmth in these walls. This is where your nightly routine begins. It is a battle of wool, fur, and faith against a climate that shows no mercy. You lie back slowly, letting your head sink onto a lumpy pillow. The straw inside crunches. You can almost feel the condensation of your own breath settling against the fabric, moistening it, making it colder still. The night is long, stretching out like an unkind guest who refuses to leave. Sleep will arrive, yes, but only after you've stopped noticing how your toes ache or how your breath lingers in visible clouds. This is your first night, and you realize that surviving until dawn is no small feat. You are still lying there, your cloak wrapped tightly around your shoulders, when you realize that what keeps you alive through such a night isn't a single item, but the sheer number of layers pressed between your body and the air. Linen, wool, more linen, another piece of wool. It is a game of stacking barriers against the cold until you feel more like a wrapped parcel than a person. Without these layers, you would be stiff as frozen meat by morning. The first layer, clinging closest to your skin, is a simple linen shift. By modern standards, it's rough, but here it is a practical marvel. It's meant to be washed more often than your outer clothes, and it wicks away sweat, keeping the rest of your precious garments dry. A damp layer against the skin is a death sentence in this cold. Over that comes the wool. This is the true hero of the night. Medieval wool is not the soft merino sweater you know today. It is heavier, denser, and coarse, almost scratchy. But it is precious in its ability to trap heat. This wool is often blended with the natural oils left over from the sheep's fleece, the lanolin. This oil offers a small degree of water resistance, but it also produces a distinct odor, something between earthy and oily that lingers in every garment. As you drift in this chamber, you can smell it, mixing with the smoke and the damp stone. To your medieval nose, this scent isn't unpleasant. It simply means survival. You add a second tunic, perhaps a surcoat, then hose for your legs, and thick woolen socks if fortune favors you. Some knights even sleep with their boots nearby, though loosening them to avoid cutting off circulation is a wise move. And then there is the head. Wealthier knights sometimes have nightcaps, but these are not the flimsy cloth cones of later stories. These are full, heavy hoods, sometimes with long tails or liripipes that can be wrapped under the chin and around the neck like a scarf. One account describes a nobleman so fond of his cap that he refused to remove it even during late-night meetings. Imagine rolling over in bed, your hood tied tightly, looking more like a bundled onion than a warrior. The layers don't end with clothing. Blankets woven from wool can be stacked 3 or 4 high. If the household is wealthy, there might be a single linen sheet between the woolen covers. This isn't for warmth. Linen is cold to the touch. It is for comfort. It feels smoother against the skin than the scratchy wool, and it is far easier to launder. That inner sheet is often the only layer washed with any regularity, since laundering heavy wool blankets is a complicated multi-day ordeal. So, as you drift towards sleep, you are not just snug beneath covers. You are practically entombed in an organized hierarchy of fabric. Scholars still debate just how many layers were considered normal. Some argue that even poorer knights serving wealthier lords were granted enough linens and woolens to keep from freezing, since a dead retainer was of little use. Others suggest that unless a man was truly wealthy, he scraped by with a single blanket and the clothes he wore that day, relying on sheer toughness to endure. The written records, the household inventories, are patchy. They list bedding, but rarely specify quantity. Your fingers, buried beneath the layers, begin to thaw. The wool scratches, yes, but it also traps the heat your body gives off. You curl tighter, and the sensation of warmth finally begins to spread inward, slow but steady, like embers glowing in the marrow of your bones. You shift your weight, and the chill still creeps through the gaps in your layers. You realize that the surface beneath you feels different depending on who you are. What separates a hard night's rest from something almost luxurious is the secret of the mattress itself. A simple soldier, a man-at-arms, collapses onto a sack filled with straw. It rustles, it scratches, it pricks his skin with tiny, sharp stalks. The smell is sharp, almost barn-like, earthy and raw. For him, this is comfort enough. It is better than the frozen ground outside. But if you are a knight of some means, or if you serve a wealthy household, you might recline on a feather mattress. The difference is as wide as the chasm between peasant and lord. Down and quills, stuffed inside linen covers, soften the night into something closer to floating than sleeping. One well-attested detail from the period tells us that feather beds were prized possessions. They were often listed in wills alongside land, jewelry, or armor. A mattress wasn't just bedding. It was a symbol of status, a declaration that your nights mattered as much as your days. When nobles traveled, their household staff would sometimes cart these massive feather mattresses along with them, folded or rolled, so the lord wouldn't have to endure the common straw pallets of an inn. Just picture the entourage lugging great bundles of bedding up a mountain pass while the lord fusses about whether the feathers will flatten in the damp. But there's something almost comic in these accounts too. Some medieval writers, particularly those of a martial or monastic bent, mocked the wealthy for their beds of pride. They insisted that soft feathers made men weak. A warrior softened by too much comfort, they claimed, would falter in battle. And yet, when the frost turned every joint to stone, who could really resist the lure of a cushioned retreat? Archaeological digs in old castles have revealed traces of these bedding materials: bits of goose down, the remains of compacted straw, and fragments of rush mats that were laid beneath mattresses to protect them from the damp, cold floors. The evidence suggests that sleeping arrangements varied wildly. Some rooms held simple pallets on the ground. Others boasted raised wooden frames, the precursors to the modern bed, designed to keep the cold earth at bay. What might surprise you is how noisy these beds could be. The straw mattress crunched and shifted with every movement. The down beds had their own quirks. Without careful stitching, the sharp ends of the quills poked through the fabric, pricking the skin at inconvenient moments. More than one record mentions complaints of quills stabbing a dreamer, turning luxury into a restless affair. You ease yourself down onto your mattress. Perhaps it is straw. The scent of dry grass fills your nostrils. It rustles under your shifting body, firm but uneven. Or perhaps it is feathers, yielding softly, wrapping you like a cloud. But even the grandest mattress can't erase the cold completely. A featherbed insulates, trapping body heat. But in a freezing chamber, that warmth eventually leaks away. You still need the blankets. You still need the fur throws. The featherbed is not salvation. It is simply one more layer in the endless war against winter. The mattress beneath you has given what little relief it can, but it cannot win the struggle alone. To truly stand a chance, knights turn to another solution: animal skins. You draw a heavy pelt over yourself. Instantly, the scent hits you, musky, earthy, carrying whispers of the forest it once belonged to. You are not only lying beneath warmth, you are lying beneath a memory of the hunt. Contemporary descriptions of noble households confirmed that pelts were among the most valued forms of insulation. Thick hides of deer, bear, wolf, or even boar would be draped across a bed. They are heavy. Their weight presses down like an anchor, and in that pressure there is a sense of safety. Fur traps warmth in a way that woven cloth struggles to match. A knight returning frozen from a patrol would sink into such covers and feel life slowly return to his limbs. What's curious is how the type of fur mattered, not just for warmth, but for prestige. Bear skins carried an aura of power linked to the animal's strength. Wolf pelts evoke the wild danger outside the castle walls, now conquered and domesticated on your bed. Deer hide suggested nobility, echoing the grand hunts that were the privilege of lords. Even the choice of which animal you slept beneath was a kind of silent brag. One vivid anecdote from a 14th century inventory mentions a noblewoman's bed layered with no fewer than 8 pelts, each one trimmed with fine embroidery. Imagine it. The hides themselves spoke of hunting prowess, but the stitching turned them into art. Yet there is another side to this story, the smell. Unlike clean wool, pelts often retain the scents of the tanning oils, the animal's own musk, or a lingering dampness. Imagine curling beneath a wolf pelt and catching a whiff of something halfway between leather and a barnyard. It was effective, yes, but never fully refined. Archaeological remains also suggest their practical uses. A fur throw doubled as a cloak during travel. A knight on campaign might roll his favorite pelt into his pack, sleeping beneath it in an open field one night and laying it across his castle bed the next. Portability mattered. What might amuse you is the way some chroniclers described noble arguments over fur ownership. Families passed down particular pelts as heirlooms, as if they were jewels. Brothers quarreled over who inherited the great bear skin, believing it too valuable to be split. The idea of hardened warriors bickering like children over a blanket feels oddly human. As you lie here, you can feel the texture of the fur beneath your fingertips, coarse guard hairs on the outside, and a softer, denser undercoat pressed against your skin. There is a strange intimacy to it. Each night, knights cocooned themselves, not just in cloth woven by human hands, but in the skins of creatures that once prowled the same forests. The bed itself became a meeting point between man and nature. Sometimes, these pelts even lined the insides of the bed curtains, creating miniature caves of warmth. Picture drawing the heavy drapes around you, their inner surfaces lined with fur, transforming your bed into a den. You crawl inside, close the curtains, and suddenly you are no longer a knight in a drafty chamber. You are something closer to an animal in hibernation. Even the warmest fur, however, couldn't block every draft. When the fire in the hearth died low, the chill would sneak back in. You might pull the pelts tighter, bury your nose in their folds, and still wake to frost clinging to your beard. Nothing in a medieval castle was absolute protection. Comfort was relative, measured not by how cozy you felt, but by whether you survived the night with your blood still flowing.
The pelts are heavy across your body, but still the cold creeps in at the edges. You understand why a castle never relied on bedding alone. Across the room, a fire glows, its light faint against the damp stone. The hearth is the beating heart of the chamber, and yet it feels like a distant ally, flickering bravely, but failing to reach the corners where you lie. One well-known fact about castle architecture is that fireplaces weren't always part of the earliest designs. Many great halls originally had open hearths in the center of the floor, with smoke venting upward through a louver in the roof. Later, as construction improved, wall-mounted fireplaces with chimneys became common, especially in private chambers. These were marvels for their time, directing smoke away while offering a focused source of heat. But let's be honest, those fireplaces, noble as they looked, were still tragically inefficient. The heat they produced mostly escaped straight up the chimney, while the vacuum they created actively pulled more cold air in from the windows and doors. You can imagine it now, sitting close to the blaze, your face flushed warm, while your back remains icy. The contrast is almost comical. Half your body in summer, half in winter, all at once. What might amuse you is how people tried to outwit that imbalance. Some households used great metal firebacks, often decorated with coats of arms, to reflect more heat outward into the room. But this was a minor improvement. Warmth in a castle was a puzzle no one fully mastered. And that fire demanded constant human labor. A curious account from a 15th century manor mentions servants who were ordered to keep the fire burning all through the night, not for light, but simply to ensure the Lord could rise at dawn without shivering. You can picture the weary attendant creeping into the chamber at midnight, gently tossing on another log, stifling a cough as his master stirs. That fuel itself tells another story. Castles consume staggering amounts of wood. Entire forests were managed just to supply logs for the hearths and kitchens. When shortages came, or during a long siege, fires burned lower, and those nights must have felt endless. You are tucked beneath your furs, but your eyes keep drifting toward the flames. The sound of crackling wood is soothing, a soft counterpoint to the wind outside. The smoke curls upward, disappearing into the chimney's throat. For a moment, the fire makes you feel secure. But then you shift, just a little farther from the hearth, and you notice how quickly the warmth dissolves. At the edge of your bed, it's already gone. The air against your skin feels heavy and damp again. Fire gave only localized comfort. Here's an odd little practice. Some lords had their beds positioned directly beside the fireplace, close enough that the heat touched the heavy curtains enclosing them. Servants worried about stray sparks, but the masters insisted. Better a scorched drape than a frozen nose. It's almost endearing, the thought of a mighty knight arranging his bed like a child scooting closer to a campfire. That is the paradox of the castle hearth, a symbol of wealth and ingenuity, yet always a reminder that even the richest knight still shivered. The fire burned, but the cold always returned. The great hearth in the wall burns low, its embers sighing more than crackling. You turn under your pelts, grateful for what little warmth remains, when you notice a smaller glow nearby. It is a brazier. These iron ore or bronze bowls,
filled with glowing coals, were scattered through chambers like glowing guardians of the night. They were less impressive than a roaring hearth, but they were far more practical. They gave heat exactly where you needed it, close to your body, near your bed, by your frozen hands. Period records describe how households relied on these portable heaters, not just in bedrooms, but in drafty hallways, chapels, and stairwells. Imagine carrying one carefully by its handles, the hot coals shifting like red jewels inside, and setting it beside your bed. Suddenly, the air warms just enough for your fingers to unclench. What's striking is how risky they were. Braziers consumed oxygen and, if not properly vented, filled the chamber with smoke and deadly carbon monoxide. There are chilling stories of households overcome by fumes, slipping into unconsciousness, never to wake again. One chronicle warns of knights who sought warmth but found death instead. Yet, people embraced them. What alternative did they have? Without these glowing bowls, the winter night could numb your very marrow. There's something deeply human in that gamble, risking a smoky chamber rather than surrendering to frost. A curious note survives in the writings of a Florentine merchant. He described adding aromatic herbs to the coals. Lavender, rosemary, or dried orange peels were tossed in, masking the sting of burning charcoal with perfume. Imagine drifting to sleep as fragrant smoke curls into your blankets, your senses half soothed, half unsettled. And an even stranger custom appears in some household accounts. Servants would carry these braziers into their master's bed before sleep, sliding them under the thick covers to pre-warm the sheets. They were removed at the last moment to avoid burns. The bed would remain toasty for a short while, just long enough for its occupant to drift off before the chill returned. Picture yourself climbing into a bed warmed by fire moments before, the sheets cozy, your sigh of relief echoing against the stone. It feels almost modern, doesn't it? A medieval version of an electric blanket, minus any of the safety guarantees. You lie back and let your imagination linger on the brazier's glow. The coals pulse, dimming and flaring like a giant's heartbeat. The air near your face grows warmer while your toes still ache. That uneven comfort is frustrating, but also strangely grounding. Life in a castle was always a compromise. Never perfect solutions, only partial victories. You know the brazier will fade before dawn. You know servants will creep in to clean the ashes. But for now, it is enough. You've turned a hostile room into something almost welcoming. The brazier fades to embers, and you turn beneath your furs, aware once more of the draft licking at your cheeks. It's then you realize another secret weapon against the cold, the curtains. These are not the flimsy, decorative drapes you might imagine. These are thick, heavy hangings of wool or even velvet for the wealthy that transform the bed into a private fortress. You tug the heavy fabric inward, drawing it across the carved wooden posts until the world outside disappears. Suddenly, you are no longer lying in a wide, drafty chamber. You are inside a cocoon. Documented inventories from the late Middle Ages show how valuable these enclosed beds were. The idea was simple. Stop the ceaseless drafts by building a tent within the room. The curtains create a microclimate. They trap the heat of your own body, the warmth of your breath, and even the faint glow of the brazier you've tucked nearby. You notice something immediately. Once the curtains are drawn, the sound changes. The high, vaulted echoes of the chamber fade, replaced by a muffled silence. The wind still moans through the arrow slits, but it feels distant now, softened by layers of fabric. You hear only the rasp of your own breath and the faint rustle as you shift beneath the pelts. The bed becomes an island of peace in a stormy sea of stone. What may surprise you is how much privacy these curtains provided in a world where solitude was almost unknown. Castles were crowded places. Chambers were often shared by attendants, guards, or family members. To draw the bed curtains was not only to keep warm, but to vanish into your own private space. Inside, you might whisper prayers, share secrets, or simply relish the silence. The curtains were both insulation and escape. Accounts from the period even mention bed curtains embroidered with religious scenes or family heraldry. Imagine falling asleep each night, gazing at stitched saints or your own coat of arms, their outlines lit faintly by a candle. The bed was not just a place of rest, but a canvas of identity. There's a curious anecdote from the court of Burgundy. One duke reportedly kept a small dog at the foot of his curtained bed, believing its body heat added to his own. The image is delightful. A mighty lord, conqueror of battles, huddled in a fabric cave with a furry companion snoring by his toes. Now, imagine yourself inside one. You slide into the narrow space and pull the curtains tight. The warmth of your body builds quickly. The darkness is deep, broken only by the faintest line of light where the fabrics overlap. You are safe. You are sheltered. The irony, of course, is that these beds could be stifling too. Too many layers of fabric, too much trapped breath, and the air would grow heavy and stale. Some accounts describe sleepers waking in the night to pull open a corner for fresh air, only to regret it instantly as a draft sliced through. Comfort was a delicate balance. Too closed and you sweated, too open and you froze. But for now, encased in your imagined canopy, you recognize the truth. Comfort was never guaranteed, but people created it where they could. Your eyes close, and in the muffled dark, you feel suspended in time. The chamber outside might as well not exist. The curtains are drawn heavy around you, but as you settle deeper, you realize something important. The warmth of your chamber, the fire, the brazier, the neatly layered pelts, wasn't achieved by your hands alone. Long before you lay down, servants had scurried through this room, unseen and uncelebrated, making it ready for your sleep. Without them, no knight, no matter how gallant, would have rested easily on these frozen nights. Written accounts of noble households show how elaborate these nightly preparations could be. Servants were expected to strew fresh rushes, spread the blankets, arrange the pelts, and, in some cases, warm the bed with hot stones wrapped in cloth. But the most well-documented detail is the use of the warming pan. A metal pan with a long handle, like a covered skillet. Servants would fill this pan with glowing embers from the hearth, close the lid, and then slide it between the cold linen sheets. They would move it back and forth, drawing it out just before the knight climbed into bed. It was a delicate act. Too much heat and the linens might scorch. Too little and the bed stayed cold. Picture a young page concentrating fiercely, gripping the hot iron, praying he wouldn't set fire to his lord's mattress. What might surprise you is how much of this preparation carried symbolism. Servants didn't just make the bed. They performed a ritual of order and service. A neatly spread blanket signified loyalty. A chamber properly warmed declared discipline and respect. In a household where hierarchy mattered more than anything, even a bed could reflect the structure of obedience. There are curious anecdotes scattered in letters. One mentions a nobleman who scolded his attendants because the rushes on the floor weren't sprinkled with enough fragrant herbs. Another describes a lady's chamber where servants scented the air with burning rosemary before sleep, claiming it chased away unwholesome vapors. The servants have been and gone, leaving behind faint traces of their work. The fire glows steadily because someone carefully stoked it. The floor smells faintly of herbs, masking the damp stone. The bedclothes are arranged perfectly. You lie down into order, into warmth, into care that is invisible but tangible. There's something humbling in that realization. Knights rode into battle, their names carried in song, but their nightly survival depended on quiet figures who never earned ballots. A chamber prepared was the true foundation of rest. In some households, attendants even whispered small prayers as they prepared the bed, invoking protection for their master against both cold and spirits. The line between physical and spiritual comfort blurred. Of course, it wasn't always perfect. Records mention mistakes, forgotten coals, damp blankets, firewood not stacked properly. Masters noticed, and punishments could be sharp. One servant's lapse meant a lord's discomfort, and in the rigid hierarchy of the castle, discomfort could quickly turn to anger. But tonight, the work has been done well. You lie wrapped in their work, your breath slowing. The night outside is still bitter, but in here, order has been carved out of chaos. And with that, at last, you find yourself able to let go. The servants have gone, leaving the room prepared. Yet the warmth is still tenuous. You shift beneath your blankets and pelts, thinking of one final secret, one final source of heat that could mean the difference between comfort and misery: sharing. In the medieval world, a bed was rarely yours alone. Companionship, whether chosen or enforced, was another shield against the cold. You may imagine that knights, so fierce and proud, demanded solitude at night. But the truth is far less romantic. Chronicles and household records remind us that even men of rank often slept beside squires, brothers-in-arms, or fellow retainers. Sometimes it was convenience, too few beds for too many bodies. Sometimes it was strategy, warmth multiplied when shared. And sometimes it was simply custom. To us, it might seem awkward. To them, it was survival. Bedding was expensive. Mattresses, blankets, pelts, and curtains were valuable commodities. Sharing preserved these resources while doubling the chance of warmth. A squire might curl up at the foot of his master's bed, soaking up residual heat while remaining ready to serve at a moment's notice. Companions might lie shoulder to shoulder, their combined body heat trapped beneath one heavy cover. There's an unusual detail tucked into one English inventory: A bed large enough for 4 people, listed as the property of a wealthy knight. This wasn't extravagance, it was logistics. More bodies meant more warmth. The bed became a communal shelter. Imagine the muffled breathing in the dark, the sound of armed men turned human again, each sigh weaving into a rhythm that lulled them toward sleep. What might amuse you is the humor that must have crept into such arrangements. Some accounts mention disputes about who got the warmer middle spot and who was left to guard the cold edge near the curtain. Brothers, friends, and squires probably joked or grumbled about cold toes poking them awake. Researchers continue to puzzle over how often knights actually shared with their peers, rather than just their subordinates. Some suggest rank was strictly observed, lords rarely shared, while squires crowded together by the dozen. Others argue that necessity blurred those boundaries, especially during travel or war. In a winter campaign, a tent would be crammed with bodies, hierarchy melting away in the face of frost. You roll onto your side, imagining the warmth of another body beside you. The chamber is still cold, yes, but the shared heat makes it bearable. Your breath mingles with theirs, forming faint clouds in the curtained dark. There is an intimacy here, not romantic, not necessarily even friendly, but born of pure necessity. An odd anecdote survives from a Burgundian chronicle. 2 knights complained bitterly about their lord's snoring, which was so thunderous it kept the entire chamber awake. Yet neither man dared move from his side, because the heat in the middle of the bed was far better than the chill on the outer edge. Picture those proud warriors trapped between irritation and frostbite. You realize that the greatest defense against the coldest medieval night was not stone, or fire, or pelts. It was each other. The quiet of shared breathing lulls you toward sleep. But just as your eyes close, another scent stirs in the chamber. It isn't the musk of pelts or the smoke of the brazier. It's green, fresh, and faintly sweet. You open your eyes and remember what lies underfoot: the rushes. Every few weeks, servants would scatter these reeds or straw-like plants across the cold stone floors. This served 2 purposes: to soften the unyielding hardness of the stone and to cover the odors that would otherwise sour the air. Tonight, the fragrance rises gently, mixing with the smoke and the damp. You are lying in a room that smells like a meadow and a chimney at the same time. Written records from castles describe this custom clearly. Floors were covered with rushes or hay, and sometimes mixed with fragrant herbs like lavender, chamomile, or rosemary. This wasn't just decoration. It was a form of hygiene before carpets became common. And in a chamber where knights and squires tramped in mud, ash, and sweat, any attempt at freshness mattered. There's a peculiar little note from a 15th century household roll. It describes adding fennel and mint to the rushes to sweeten the Lord's dream. Whether it truly influenced sleep or not, the idea is charming, that herbs underfoot could drift upward into slumber, weaving calmness into the night. Imagine the faint hint of mint curling into your breath as you pull the blanket closer. Archaeologists have found traces of these floor coverings, confirming their use over centuries. The mixture often included hay, leaves, and even straw from the stables. This explains the variety of smells one might encounter, some sweet, some distinctly less so. You can almost picture yourself trying to fall asleep while the scent of rosemary tangles with something unmistakably barnyard. But there's a debate among scholars about how often these rushes were replaced. Some argue they were changed regularly, especially in wealthy households. Others suggest they lingered for months, with new layers simply scattered over the old, compacted mess, trapping not only scent but filth and vermin. The truth likely varied by household. Tonight, you are fortunate. The rushes smell newly laid. What may surprise you is how the sound of the rushes contributed to the atmosphere. When a servant crossed the floor, the reeds rustled gently. When you shifted in bed, a faint crunch echoed up. In a chamber otherwise filled with the hollow silence of stone, those sounds were strangely soothing, like the whisper of grass under a summer breeze carried into the dead of winter. In a world where baths were infrequent and castle walls seeped moisture, this freshness mattered deeply. It wasn't just about the air, it was about the spirit. To sleep in a room that smelled alive was to remember that winter would eventually end. Your eyelids grow heavy. Beneath you, the faint rustle of herbs. Around you, curtains. Over you, pelts. You realize that survival wasn't just about enduring the cold. It was about finding these little fragments of comfort. Sounds, scents, and textures that made the night bearable. The fragrance of the rushes lingers, but as you shift in your curtained cocoon, another reality presses in. The castle itself is not truly sealed. Drafts find every gap, slipping in like invisible fingers. Step outside the bed curtains for just a moment, and the truth becomes obvious. The corridors of stone are rivers of icy air. Descriptions from visitors to medieval castles make this clear. Even the most solid stronghold was riddled with cracks, joints between stones, gaps around wooden shutters. And the arrow slits, those narrow openings essential for defense, let in far more than just light. They funneled the wind, making it accelerate with a sharp, high-pitched whistle. The great halls, with their towering ceilings, trapped echoes but never warmth. Imagine walking down one of those corridors barefoot at night. The stone is so cold it bites into the soles of your feet. A knight, hardened by battle, might still curse under his breath at the misery of it. Evidence from castle ruins shows how little insulation existed. The walls were thick, yes, but thickness alone did not equal warmth. Once the stone absorbed the winter's chill, it radiated cold like a glacier. No tapestry, no wooden paneling could completely stop it. The very design that kept invaders out turned the building itself into a refrigerator. What might surprise you is the constant noise that accompanied these drafts. The wind didn't merely pass through, it sang. You would hear whistling at the shutters, moaning in the hallways, and a low hum where cracks channeled the air. At night, lying awake, it was easy to imagine those sounds as voices. Servants whispered of ghosts carried by the wind, the restless souls of those who roamed the corridors. An odd note comes from a 13th century letter where a guest complained that his candle kept blowing out in the Lord's chamber because of a wind that rushed as though the wall itself breathed. Picture that. Inside a fortress, your flame sputters as if you were standing in an open field. And yet people adapted.
Heavy wall hangings, the tapestries, softened the bite of the air. Doorways were draped with thick curtains, sometimes layered with fur. Even the beds themselves were placed strategically, away from the exterior walls if possible. A knight knew that the difference between a tolerable night and an unbearable one might come down to where his bed stood in relation to a draft.
You can't help but notice how much energy was spent fighting what a modern home solves with a single pane of glass. Comfort was always partial. Even nobles wrapped in layers of curtains and fur woke to find frost clinging to their blankets. Drafts were inescapable. Here is the curious irony. The same openings that chilled you by night protected you by day. Those arrow slits, wide on the inside and narrow on the outside, allowed defenders to shoot safely while keeping attackers at bay. The drafts that robbed your warmth were the price of your security. Safety and shivering came as a pair. You roll back beneath your pelts, grateful for your curtain cocoon. Outside it, the chamber is a cavern of restless drafts. Inside, you have carved a bubble of warmth. As your breathing slows, the moan of wind in the corridors becomes background music. Unwanted, eerie, but constant. The wind has become a companion now, its voice weaving through the stone like a restless spirit. You lie in your curtained bed, warmed by pelts, lulled by the crunch of rushes. Yet even in this warmth, your ears stay open. In the deep of night, sound carries through the castle with an uncanny clarity. Contemporary descriptions often remark on the strangeness of night in a medieval fortress. There was no hum of machines, no traffic, no background of electric life. Instead, the silence was broken only by elemental things: the creak of timbers, the whistle of drafts, the occasional crack of settling stone. And beyond those, the sounds of human presence. Guards stamping in the courtyard, dogs barking below, the distant clang of a chain. In such a profound stillness, every noise seemed louder, sharper, more significant. Archaeological reconstructions of castles demonstrate how well sound carried. The hard stone walls amplified echoes. A whisper in a stairwell might travel far, while a dropped poker in the great hall could reverberate into the upper chambers. Imagine trying to drift into dreams while hearing footsteps far away that seemed in the silence to be marching just outside your curtain. For a knight trained to be alert, that half-awareness never truly faded. What may surprise you is how much the silence itself could unsettle people. To modern ears, it might sound peaceful, but to those who lived surrounded by the chatter, clatter, and labor of the day, the sudden stillness of night felt unnatural. Chronicles even speak of noblemen unnerved by the absence of sound, interpreting it as a bad omen. When the dogs stopped barking or the wind paused, hearts quickened in the dark. And there were always the stories, the legends of ghosts wandering the drafty corridors, of murdered retainers, of ladies in white drifting near the chapel. Servants whispered these tales, and once planted, they seeped into the dreams of even the most hardened knight. Close your eyes in that cocoon, and the groan of a beam becomes the sigh of some forgotten soul. The wail of wind through an arrow slit becomes a lament. There's an amusing little record from a manor in France. One guest wrote of being kept awake by the complaining stare, a wooden step that groaned so loudly each time the temperature changed that he swore spirits were marching up and down all night. In reality, it was just timber responding to the cold, but to a mind half asleep, the difference was not always clear. You shift under your blankets and listen carefully. The soundscape sharpens. The flutter of a shutter, a guard's muffled cough outside, the distant howl of a wolf carried in on the wind. And yet, oddly, those same sounds could bring comfort. The guard's footsteps meant someone was awake, keeping watch. The dog's bark meant the outer yard was secure. Even the moan of the wind reminded you that you were sheltered behind stone rather than exposed in a tent on a battlefield. In comparison, a creaking beam felt like reassurance. Snores from shared chambers, the drip of water through a gutter, the faint nicker of a horse in the stable below. None of it matched, yet together it created a kind of lullaby. The very noises that might have frightened you the first night become the rhythms of survival. You lie in the muffled silence, your body warmed by pelts and blankets, but your thoughts linger on ritual. For a night, the coldest nights weren't simply endured through fabric and fire. They were softened by prayer. Before crawling beneath the curtains and furs, you would have knelt, clasped your hands, and whispered words to the heavens. You would ask not only for warmth, but for safety through the darkness. Manuscripts and personal accounts confirm that evening prayers were a daily habit. Compline, the final office of the day in the monastic tradition, heavily influenced lay practice as well. Knights, especially those bound by oaths, would recite psalms before sleep, the Latin phrases rolling softly off their tongues. In manus tuas, Domine, commendo spiritum meum. Into your hands, O Lord, I commend my spirit. The chamber, for a moment, became a chapel. These prayers were not always lofty. Many were simple petitions for the safety of family, for health, for protection against fever or frost. One common plea asked God to shield us from the perils of the night. In a castle filled with drafts, sickness, and the ever-present risk of attack, such perils felt tangible. Prayer was armor for the hours you could not defend yourself. What may surprise you is how physical these rituals were. Knights often crossed themselves, kissed a crucifix hung beside the bed, or traced blessings onto their blankets. These gestures were tactile comforts, as much about soothing the body as saving the soul. Curiously, some knights kept small relics or charms tucked into their pillows, a fragment of a saint's bone, a sliver of the true cross, or a blessed medal. Whether out of deep faith or simple superstition, these tokens gave reassurance. If the wind howled too fiercely, one could clutch the hidden relic and believe safety lay within it. There's a charming anecdote recorded from a 14th century knight. He admitted to falling asleep mid-prayer, still kneeling by his bed, his head bowed forward onto the mattress. His squire found him in that same posture at dawn. Was it devotion or pure exhaustion? Perhaps both. It paints a picture of men caught between piety and fatigue, clinging to ritual even as sleep claimed them. What might amuse you is how these prayers also served as a kind of medieval sleep aid. The rhythm of reciting verses, the repetitive cadence of the Latin lulled the mind. Just as lullabies soothed children, so too did these chants ease warriors. You lie back, your body heavy, your mind lighter. The cold still exists, the risks remain, but your heart slows. You have armed yourself not with steel, but with words. And now you can rest. For a night, that spiritual armor was as important as any fur or fire. It gave you the courage to close your eyes in a world where sleep was never without danger.
Your whispered prayers have faded into the stillness. But even as you surrender to sleep, you are never truly alone. Outside your curtained cocoon, on the walls and in the courtyards, men remain awake. Centuries keep watch through the bitter hours, their task as endless as the winter night itself.
You can almost picture them, cloaks drawn tight, torches sputtering in the wind, eyes heavy yet alert. While you nestle under pelts, they are stamping their feet against the frozen flagstones, shifting from one leg to the other just to keep the blood flowing. Castle records and military ordinances often mention the rotation of guards. Even in smaller households, someone had to remain alert lest thieves, enemies, or fire catch the inhabitants unawares. Squires and men-at-arms shared this duty, trudging along the battlements while others slept. The wind howled hardest there, unbroken by walls, cutting through wool and into bone. We know with certainty that these guards devised countless tricks to endure their vigils. Chronicles describe them clapping their hands, walking brisk laps of the wall, or crouching near small brazier fires where their lords permitted them. In some places, dogs were kept with the guards, both to give warning and to lend warmth, their shaggy bodies pressed against the men's boots. What may surprise you is that the sounds of these centuries often drifted back into chambers like yours. The echo of boots on stone, the distant murmur of voices exchanging a watchword, the clang of a weapon knocked against the parapet, all reminders that vigilance never ceased. Lying in bed, you might drift toward dreams, faintly aware of those unseen guardians outside. The thought was reassuring, though also a reminder of the danger lurking beyond the walls. A curious account from a German castle mentions sentries who were punished for falling asleep on watch by being forced to stand barefoot in the snow. The cruelty of such measures makes you wince, but it underscores how vital their wakefulness was. A single lapse could endanger everyone within. The guards suffered so that you could rest. Researchers today still discuss whether the guards' presence genuinely reassured sleepers or unsettled them. Some argue the rhythmic sounds of the patrol lulled residents like a protective heartbeat. Others suggest it simply reminded them of the threats outside, preventing true relaxation. Perhaps it was both, reassurance wrapped in tension. You lie beneath your pelts, eyes half closed, while faint footsteps echo along the battlements. A low murmur of voices drifts through the shutters, followed by the bark of a watchdog. You know these men are cold, weary, and perhaps cursing their fate. Yet you also know their presence is why you can let go, however briefly. As sleep pulls you deeper, those centuries remain in your thoughts. You know they will still be there at dawn, weary but steadfast. Their duty frames your dreams, a reminder that rest in a medieval castle was always a collective act. Some endured the night awake so that others could close their eyes. The guards outside march on, their boots echoing against the frozen stone. Inside your curtained nest, you shift and feel an immense, profound relief. Your armor is not on you. The weight of chain mail and plate, that iron shell worn through the daylight hours, has been cast aside. For a night, this nightly shedding was as necessary as food or fire. To sleep in armor was nearly impossible. The body ached, the joints pinched, and the cold bit even sharper where metal pressed against flesh. Accounts from campaigns describe men collapsing in their armor out of sheer exhaustion. But these were exceptions born of brutal necessity, not choice. In the relative safety of the castle, the nightly ritual involved unbuckling straps, lifting off steel, and letting the body finally breathe. The first sensation of freedom after hours encased in iron must have been exquisite. The simple ability to stretch, to lie flat without a steel cuirass digging into your shoulders. Imagine peeling away layer after layer, greaves, gauntlets, breastplate, hearing the buckle snap loose, until finally you stood in your simple linen shift, almost weightless. A chainmail shirt alone could weigh 30 pounds or more. To lay it aside was to reclaim your body. And yet, the traces of that weight lingered in sleep. Some chroniclers speak of knights dreaming of their armor even while bare, their limbs twitching as if still bound. The heaviness of war seeped into the marrow, carried even into slumber. You can almost feel it yourself, a phantom weight pressing across your chest, echoing the burden you left on the chamber floor. There's a curious anecdote from a French source. One knight insisted on keeping his helmet within arm's reach of the bed, convinced he might be attacked in the night. He slept under fur, yes, but with one hand resting on the polished, cold steel. Imagine the unease of dozing while your palm grazed cold iron, half comforted, half cursed by its presence. Scholars today still discuss how armor shaped the health of those who wore it daily. Some suggest chronic back pain, compressed joints, and stiff muscles plagued knights even in their youth. Others argue their bodies adapted, toughened by the training. As you lie here now, your body feels light. The blankets weigh on you, but compared to mail, they are nothing. You roll your shoulders, flex your legs, marveling at how soft the fur feels against skin no longer pressed by steel. What might surprise you is how much ritual surrounded the armor's storage. Squires carefully arranged each piece near the bed, polished it when possible, and checked for damage. It wasn't just equipment, it was identity. And so, even in sleep, it remained close, a silent sentinel at the bedside. You turn in your cocoon of fur, whispering a sigh of gratitude that, at least tonight, your body is free. The chill of the chamber still bites, but without steel clinging to you, warmth has a chance. Sleep comes easier when iron is not your blanket, when the only weight you carry is that of your own weary body. The relief of being free from armor lingers as you stretch, but memory pulls you back to a time before you had even earned the right to call yourself a knight. You think of the years spent as a squire, when sleep was not private or cocooned, but communal, cold, and loud. If the noble chambers felt like drafty caves, the dormitories of the squires resembled barns with beds. Descriptions in household accounts make this clear. Dozens of boys, some as young as 12, crowded together in long, cold chambers. They lay on simple pallets of straw or thin mattresses, wrapped in whatever blankets were available. Curtains? Those were reserved for their masters. Privacy was a luxury they did not know. Instead, their warmth came from numbers. Bodies pressed side by side, the air thick with breath, sweat, and youthful chatter. One account tells us that in certain castles, squires were given no separate bedding at all, only their cloaks to wrap around themselves, lying shoulder to shoulder on the rush-strewn floors. Imagine that. Your bed was the same garment you wore in the training yard all day, still smelling of horse, sweat, and mud. What may surprise you is how lively these chambers were, even in the darkness. Boys whispered jokes, sang snatches of songs, wrestled under blankets, or plotted mischief. The soundscape of a squire's night was less solemn than a knight's. It was full of life, even amid the discomfort. Perhaps that noise, that companionship, made the cold more bearable. An unusual anecdote survives from a 15th century account. A knight, recalling his youth, admitted that he often fell asleep to the sound of a dozen different snores, like a chorus in uneven rhythm. He claimed that years later, as a lord, he couldn't rest in silence. He needed noise to sleep, as if his body had been trained to associate rest with chaos. Archaeological studies have uncovered wide dormitory spaces thought to have housed these young men. Traces of ash pits nearby suggest that fires were rarely built inside the rooms themselves, too risky, too smoky. Warmth was secondary to practicality. Blankets, cloaks, and shared bodies were their only insulation. Scholars still discuss whether these harsh conditions were deliberate. Some argue they were intended to toughen the boys, preparing them for the rigors of knighthood. Others believe it was simply necessity. Too many bodies, too little wealth, and not enough fabric to go around. You close your eyes and imagine yourself back there, a boy among many, curled on straw, a blanket slipping off your shoulder, an elbow digging into your side as your bunkmate rolls over. The air smells of hay and sweat. The cold gnaws at your toes, but laughter and whispered gossip soften the edges. There's something oddly sweet about those memories. The discomfort forged bonds. Boys who survived winters together, shivering under shared covers, grew into men who trusted each other on the battlefield. As a knight now, lying in your private chamber, you remember those days. The squire's dormitory was no place of comfort, but it was a place of growth. You realize that even the harshest nights left behind something valuable, the memory of never having endured it alone. The memory of the squire's crowded hall fades, and your mind drifts back to your present chamber. Now you sleep not as a boy among many, but as a knight granted privacy, or at least something close to it. For those of higher rank, the difference was dramatic. Nobles often enjoyed a solar, a private room separated from the great hall. It was warmer and more richly furnished than the bare dormitories below. Evidence from surviving castles confirms how these solars were designed. They were often placed on upper floors, away from the drafty ground level. They contained their own fireplaces built into the wall, and sometimes even glazed windows, an extraordinary luxury if fortune and wealth allowed. Here, the bed was not just a pallet. It was a centerpiece, elevated on a carved frame, draped in those curtains we pictured earlier, perhaps dyed with expensive pigments. But the most important feature was the tapestries. Thick, heavy, and woven with scenes of hunts, battles, or biblical stories, these tapestries lined the stone walls. Their primary purpose was not decoration, but insulation. Their thick woven threads helped to soften the intense cold that seeped through the stone. Imagine lying in bed, staring at a woven deer forever chased across a forest, while beyond that wall, real deer shivered in the frosted woods. What might surprise you is that even the furniture itself became a form of warmth. Nobles kept heavy wooden chests filled with clothing, blankets, and furs. These were not just for storage, they acted as thermal anchors. The mass of wood and fabric absorbed some of the chill, breaking up the vast, empty, cold space of the room. A bare room felt colder, as if emptiness itself encouraged drafts. A cluttered solar, by contrast, could feel almost cozy. There's an unusual account from the 14th century describing a lord who demanded his servants light perfumed candles in his solar at night. They gave almost no heat, but the fragrance of beeswax mixed with herbs turned the room into something refined. He claimed it helped him sleep better, though one suspects it was as much about displaying his wealth as it was about rest. Of course, scholars continued to debate how effective these enhancements really were. Did a solar truly feel warmer, or did tapestries and furniture only give the illusion of comfort? Some argue that nobles exaggerated their coziness in their letters, eager to display their superiority. Close your eyes and picture yourself here. The bed curtains are drawn tight. The fire in the corner fireplace crackles softly. The tapestries mute the drafts, and the air carries a faint sweetness of beeswax. Compared to your memories as a squire, this feels like another world. Yet the irony remains. Even in this luxurious solar, frost still creeps along the window panes. Your breath still clouds in the air. The stone beneath the rushes still holds the winter tight. Nobility softened the cold, but it never, ever erased it. The fortress was always stronger than its inhabitants. The solar feels softer, richer, and more private than the dormitories of your youth. But even here, the night carries one final, gentle touch meant to ease you into slumber: the pillow beneath your head. In the medieval world, pillows were not the uniform cushions you know today. They varied in size, material, and, importantly, scent. Yes, scent mattered. For many knights and nobles, the act of laying one's head down was accompanied by fragrance. Herbal sachets were sewn into the linen or tucked just beneath the case, turning the pillow into a little bundle of medicine and comfort. Household inventories and guides mention lavender, rosemary, and even sage used for this purpose. These herbs were believed not only to calm the mind, but also to purify the air. In an era when foul smells were thought to cause illness, a pillow stuffed with pleasant fragrance seemed both soothing and protective. Imagine lowering your head after a day in clank and sweaty armor and inhaling the sweet, grassy perfume of lavender woven through the linen. The contrast must have felt heavenly. One well-preserved recipe from a 15th century household guide advises mixing dried rose petals with bay leaves and sewing them into a small linen pouch, which was then slipped into the pillow. The writer claimed it brought sweet dreams and eased the head. And here's something unusual. Some households used hops, the same plant later beloved for brewing beer, as a pillow stuffing. It was said to induce drowsiness. Chroniclers note that monks often used hop pillows in their infirmaries. Imagine resting your cheek against the cushion faintly reeking of a brewery, comforted by the belief it would coax you into slumber. Researchers debate how common such herbal pillows were among knights of middling wealth. Some argue they were widespread, as herbs grew abundantly in any castle garden. Others suggest the elaborate mixtures were reserved for the wealthy, while poorer retainers used plain straw-stuffed bolsters. As you sink into your imagined pillow, the effect becomes clear. The air near your face is softer, carrying not just warmth, but a memory of summer fields. Inhaling deeply, you almost forget the stone walls and the drafts. There's an anecdote worth smiling at. One knight, traveling with his household, complained bitterly when his servants forgot to pack his pillow sachet. He declared he could not sleep without his rosemary scent, claiming it kept away evil airs. Imagine a hardened warrior sulking like a child over the absence of his perfumed stuffing. What may surprise you is that these sachets often doubled as insect repellents. Strong herbs like mint or wormwood help to keep lice and fleas at bay. In an age when vermin were a constant companion, the scented pillow offered both fragrance and protection. The herbal pillow is a reminder that even in a world of iron and hardship, people sought gentleness where they could. And perhaps that is the heart of medieval sleep. Beneath the weight of furs, beside the glow of a brazier, there was still room for small comforts. Flowers dried and sewn into linen, breathing peace into the coldest night. The fragrance of lavender and rosemary lingers, lulling you toward rest. But just as your eyes flutter closed, a sound rises in the distance, deep, resonant, and impossible to ignore. The church bell. Its voice pierces the cold night, echoing across the frozen fields and moats, carrying into every chamber of the castle. Time itself was measured in these notes, and even in sleep, knights lived by their rhythm. The monastic influence on medieval life made bells central. They marked the canonical hours: matins, lauds, prime. Though a layman wasn't bound to the strict rhythm of a monk, the sound still shaped the night. Imagine lying in bed, half warmed by furs, when the bell tolls at midnight for matins. Its low vibration seems to shake the stone itself. For some, it was a reminder to whisper a prayer. For others, merely a disruption, a sign that the cold hours still stretched ahead. One detail frequently noted in chronicles is how much farther the bells carried in winter. With the leaves off the trees and the air crisp, the sound traveled, bouncing across the frozen landscape. A knight lying under his pelts might hear not only his own chapel bell, but the bells from villages miles away, layering the night with overlapping tones. What may surprise you is that bells weren't only markers of prayer. They were also alarms. A sudden, frantic peal at an odd hour could signal fire, an attack, or some other danger. Imagine being jolted from sleep, your heart racing, as the familiar, slow rhythm turned urgent and chaotic. Your body, heavy with sleep, would lurch toward your armor and sword, the cold forgotten in a rush of panic. Researchers today debate the effect of these bells on daily life. Some argue that medieval people were so accustomed to the sound that they hardly noticed, drifting back to sleep easily. Others suggest that the bells fractured rest, creating a pattern of segmented sleep. This was the idea of a first sleep and a second sleep, with a period of wakefulness in the middle of the night, perhaps spent praying, reading, or talking. As you lie in your chamber, you can almost feel the bell vibrating in your chest. The sound slides through the stone corridors, through the shuttered windows, through your curtained bed. It is inescapable. And yet, it is also strangely calming. The cold, the drafts, the creaks of timber, these are random and unsettling. But the bell is steady, intentional, a voice that brings order to the night. You know where you are in time because of it. What might amuse you is the variety of reactions people had. Some nights surely grumbled, pulling their blankets higher over their heads. Others insisted on rising, muttering a few psalms before collapsing back into sleep. By the time the silence returns, the chamber feels heavier, softer. The echoes fade into the stone, leaving only the sigh of wind and the crackle of embers. In the coldest of nights, it is not only warmth that carries you through. It is rhythm, sound, and the sense that time still moves, even when you cannot see the stars. The echo of the bell still hums in your chest, but as silence returns, another unease creeps into the chamber. It is not the draft, not the weight of the pelts, not even the restless wind. It is the ancient suspicion that the night air itself could harm you. In the medieval world, darkness wasn't simply an absence of light. It was thought to harbor invisible dangers. Spirits, demons, and sickness, all carried on the chill. You pull your blankets closer, not only against the frost, but against superstition. The medical theory of the Middle Ages leaned heavily on the concept of bad airs or miasmas. Physicians warned that cold drafts brought illness and that sleeping in open air left one vulnerable to fevers. The reasoning seems quaint now, but in chambers where people regularly woke with coughs and chills, the belief felt entirely justified. Imagine lying in bed, hearing the hiss of wind through a shutter, and worrying not just about discomfort, but about disease riding in on that invisible stream. This is why those bed curtains were so vital. One recorded detail from household regulations shows servants being instructed to block cracks around windows with cloth at night. This was not just to keep in the warmth, but to prevent these night vapors from entering. Your cocoon of fabric was as much a fortress against imagined spirits as it was against drafts. What may surprise you is how often this fear blended with folklore. People spoke of night walkers, spirits or demons carried on the wind, slipping into rooms through cracks or chimneys. Whispered tales told of souls smothered in their sleep, victims of foul air or a ghostly presence. You can almost hear the servants muttering about such things as they pulled the curtains tight, each knot in the fabric a ward against the unseen. There's a curious anecdote from a 14th century chronicle. A knight, convinced that evil spirits in the draft were causing his recurring cough, ordered his bed relocated from the outer wall to the very center of the chamber. He believed that by moving inward, he would be shielded. What might amuse you are the odd remedies people tried. Some kept garlic or onions in their chambers, believing the strong odor would repel the bad airs. Others burned herbs, filling the room with smoke to counter the invisible threats. Imagine drifting to sleep with both lavender and garlic battling in the air, a mixture hardly soothing but meant to protect. You lie still. The cold presses at the curtains. The breath of the wind is on the other side of the wall. You are safe, or at least you believe you are, and that belief is enough. In the Middle Ages, faith and superstition worked hand in hand to guard the sleeper. Tonight, they guard you. The fear of the night air lingers, yet sleep is shaped not only by superstition, but by rhythm, the larger pattern of castle life that pulses around you. A night's rest was rarely steady or predictable. It rose and fell with feasts, hunts, campaigns, and duties. The coldest nights often carried with them an exhaustion that came not from the weather alone, but from the endless demands of the day. Chronicles describe how castles came alive after sunset with banquets. Fires blazed in the great hall, goblets clinked, laughter rolled, and music swelled. Knights feasted heartily on roasted meat, bread, and ale. Yet, once the revelry ended, they would stumble back to their chambers, heavy with food and drink, sometimes too full to rest easily. Imagine lying under your pelts, your stomach groaning, while the drafts gnawed at your toes. One well-documented detail is that these feasts disrupted sleep schedules entirely. Guests lingered past midnight, telling stories or playing games. By the time they retired, the bells for matins might already be tolling. A knight's chamber was less a sanctuary than a pit stop between one duty and the next. Hunts also influenced nightly rest. A hunt often began before dawn, so men had to rise in the freezing dark, stumbling out of their warm beds while servants fumbled with torches. The result was the same: truncated sleep, taken in odd hours. Campaigns, of course, disrupted everything. Letters and military accounts tell us that during war, sleep was scattered in bursts. An hour by a fire, another against a shield, sometimes none at all. Returning to a castle after such a time meant luxury only by comparison. Even a drafty solar, even a lumpy straw mattress felt like paradise compared to a frozen ditch. There's a quirky anecdote from a 15th century castle. One night, after feasting too heavily, reportedly spent his period of midnight wakefulness composing verses about the cold. His companions teased him for writing poetry while wrapped in blankets, but he defended it, claiming the chill sharpened his mind. Picture him, quill in hand, muttering lines about icy drafts while everyone else just wanted to sleep. What might amuse you is the contrast. The peasants outside the walls, with their far simpler lives, may have slept more steadily than the knights. They went to bed with the sun and rose with the dawn, their rhythms dictated by light, not by feasts or alarms. For all their hardship, their rhythm may have been gentler. In some ways, privilege meant more disruption. You realize that medieval sleep was not a straight line, but a patchwork. It was stitched together by duty, disrupted by bells, seasoned with feasts, and softened by ritual. It was less about long hours of peace and more about finding rest wherever and whenever life allowed. Your dreams flutter in fragments, carried by the rhythm of bells and feasts, when a harsher sound interrupts, the cough of someone nearby. In a medieval castle, that cough was more than an annoyance. It was a warning. On the coldest nights, sickness lingered in the air like an unseen enemy, waiting to strike when bodies were weakest. Wrapped in your furs, you draw them tighter, suddenly aware that warmth was not just about comfort, but about survival against disease. Medical texts from the Middle Ages are filled with winter humors. Physicians believed that cold and damp provoked an imbalance in the body, leading to fevers, chills, and lingering coughs. A knight could face swords bravely by day, but at night he feared something less visible, an illness creeping into his chest, robbing him of breath. The association was so strong that chroniclers often described castles in winter as echoing with the chorus of coughing, as if the walls themselves were sick. One well-recorded fact is that the fires, while offering warmth, also filled the chambers with smoke. Combined with the drafts and the dampness, the air was a constant irritant to throats and lungs. Imagine lying under your pelts, your eyes stinging, your chest tightening, wondering if the cough you heard across the chamber was just the smoke or the beginning of something worse. What may surprise you are the remedies people attempted. Herbal teas were common. Some slept with onions near their beds, believing they absorbed the bad vapors. Others clutched charms blessed by priests. A curious anecdote survives from a 14th century castle. A knight, convinced he had caught a deadly chill, ordered his squires to pile every available blanket onto him. They obeyed, layering so many covers that he could barely move. The next morning, drenched in sweat, he declared himself cured. Whether by coincidence or a genuine fever breaking, he became known in his household as the Bundle Knight. What might amuse you is how even alcohol was treated as medicine. Physicians recommended warm spiced wine or ale to drive out the cold humors. Knights gladly followed this advice, sipping heavily before bed under the guise of protecting their health. Imagine the slurred prayers, the snores louder than any cough, and the stubborn belief that drunken warmth equaled immunity. The castle itself echoed with these nightly struggles. Death from chills, pneumonia, or plague was never far away. Sleep wasn't just a chance to rest, it was a gamble with fate. Each morning you woke alive felt like a small triumph. You pull the pelts higher, trying to convince yourself the air within your curtains is pure, protected by your herbs and prayers. In that fragile hope lies your comfort. The memory of coughs fades as your mind slips back into uneasy dreams. Yet even in sleep, your thoughts wander far beyond the frozen walls of the castle. You imagine heat, light, and sand, visions of lands you may never see again. For many nights, the coldest knights in their northern fortresses conjured up dreams of the Crusades.
They dreamed of deserts where the sun burned so fiercely that frost felt like an impossibility. Contemporary chronicles reveal how strongly the memory of these foreign campaigns lingered. Men who had marched in the Levant spoke of nights spent beneath star-filled skies, the air so warm that a simple cloak was all they needed. Back in Europe, wrapped in furs and shivering, they dreamed of that heat. Imagine lying in your curtained bed, frost creeping on the shutters, while your mind replays the taste of dates, the scent of spice markets, and the blinding blaze of the desert noon. The cold makes you crave its opposite. One well-documented account describes a crusader who returned to Burgundy and claimed he could never again feel warm. He said that in Jerusalem he had baked in his armor until his skin blistered, but once back home, no fire seemed to reach his bones. What may surprise you is that these dreams were not always nostalgic. Some nights spoke of nightmares, visions of endless marching under a scorching sun, the buzz of flies, the cries of the wounded. To wake in a freezing chamber with sweat on your brow was profoundly disorienting. Your body is chilled, yet your mind is trapped in heat. There's a curious anecdote from a 13th century chronicle. A knight in the dead of winter reportedly shouted in his sleep, begging for water, startling his companions. When they shook him awake, he laughed bitterly, saying he had been back in the desert again. The image is striking. Fur piled on his chest, frost at the window, yet his mind still burned. Scholars today still discuss whether these recurring dreams represented trauma, longing, or simple contrast. Some frame them as evidence of early psychological scars, what we might now call haunting memories of war. As you lie in your chamber, you can feel the pull of those distant images. The crackling fire becomes the desert sun. The scent of lavender in your pillow becomes spice and myrrh. The howling wind outside transforms into the murmur of foreign markets. You turn beneath your blankets, caught between two worlds. Outside, the frost still grips the moat, but inside your mind, you ride across endless dunes, the sand shifting under your horse's hooves. Dreams deliver you what waking life denies: warmth, light, and escape. Perhaps that is the final gift of the coldest nights. They make every dream of warmth feel sweeter, every memory of heat more precious. Sleep carries you far from the castle walls, if only until the dawn. The desert dream fades, and slowly you drift back into the reality of stone walls and frost. As your mind steadies, you become aware of another presence just outside the chamber: the moat. By day, it is a barrier against enemies. By night, in winter, it is a mirror of ice, gleaming faintly beneath the moon. Even in sleep, you can picture its surface, frozen solid. The castle ringed, not by water, but by a silent sheet of glass. Accounts from chroniclers often mention how winter transformed the castles. Moats, ponds, and even wells stiffened into stillness. The sight must have been uncanny, the familiar fortress suddenly encircled by a silent white plain. One detail is well attested: a frozen moat sometimes threatened security. The ice gave enemies a bridge, turning the water defense into mere decoration.
There are stories of raids launched under the cover of snow when attackers crept across the ice where once they would have floundered. Imagine lying awake in your bed, aware that the very shield of your home now offered a path to danger. The cold did not only chill, it changed the rules of defense. What may surprise you is how the frozen moat also altered the castle's soundscape. In a thaw, water lapped gently against the walls. In a deep frost, silence reigned, broken only when the ice cracked or shifted with booming, echoing groans. Residents described hearing these sudden, thunderous cracks in the night, startling them from sleep, unsure whether it was the ice breaking or the walls themselves under attack. There's a curious anecdote from a 14th century siege. Defenders poured hot water down the sides of the moat to weaken the ice, hoping to prevent enemies from crossing. The steam rose like mist in the freezing air, a ghostly sight. Imagine servants bustling in the dark, carrying buckets, the moat hissing angrily as hot and cold collided. And yet, there was beauty in it too. On clear nights, when the moonlight struck the frozen surface, the moat glittered like crystal. Residents described the eerie loveliness of the stars mirrored beneath the walls. The same ice that threatened also dazzled. What might amuse you is the thought of boys, squires or pages, sneaking out to slide across the frozen moat. Chronicles hint at such antics, with reprimands recorded for reckless squires. You can imagine their laughter echoing in the night, their boots skidding across the slick surface, while their master shivered in bed above, cursing the draft. Now, as you lie back, you let your mind drift toward that frozen circle outside. The moat is silent. The world is stilled under ice. Inside, you are swaddled in layers. Outside, the earth itself is locked in glass. The castle is ringed by silence, and within that silence, you find yourself pulled back toward rest. The moat outside lies frozen and silent, but within the walls another sound begins to rise, a chorus not of bells or drafts, but of human voices. In the great hall below, songs drift upward, softened by distance, yet persistent enough to reach your chamber. The feasting may have ended, but merriment often carried late into the night. Music and stories offered a kind of warmth no fire could provide. Contemporary descriptions tell us that after supper, minstrels often entertained the household. They plucked lutes, strummed harps, or blew on pipes, while singers wove tales of heroes, saints, or great battles. For a night, these performances weren't simply diversion. They were instruction, reminders of courage, loyalty, and virtue. Imagine lying beneath your pelts, half asleep, while a ballad of Charlemagne echoes faintly, the melody threading its way through the stone corridors. The castle itself becomes an instrument, carrying the notes across floors and chambers. One fact frequently mentioned in records is how this song and storytelling often lasted deep into the night. Guests sprawled on benches, servants dozed against walls, and lords called for encore after encore. The warmth of the wine fueled both the performers and the listeners. What may surprise you is how much of this sound seeped into the private chambers. Those stone walls amplified echoes, and even a curtained bed couldn't completely block the muffled rhythm of a drum or a chant. Your sleep was shaped not only by drafts, but by entertainment. You might dream of battles not because you fought them, but because a minstrel was singing of them an hour before you closed your eyes. There's an unusual anecdote from a northern chronicle. One knight complained that a bard's endless verses about Alexander the Great kept him awake for 3 straight nights. He begged his lord to silence the man, only to be mocked for lacking stamina. Picture him tossing beneath his blankets, groaning at each new stanza, muttering that he'd rather face the frost than more poetry. Scholars still discuss whether music at night eased rest or disturbed it. Some argue it soothed the household, much like a lullaby. Others believe it fractured sleep, keeping bodies restless long after the fires burned low.
Tonight, in your chamber, the faint strains feel more calming than disruptive, a reminder that warmth exists beyond your pelts, carried in the human voice.
What might amuse you is how the knights themselves sometimes joined in. Imagine a burly man, his nose red from the cold and the wine, leaning into a song with a voice cracked and off-key, while his companions cheered anyway. Such moments broke the severity of life, proving that even warriors needed music to survive the long winters. As you roll under your covers, the muffled notes become distant, fading into a low lull. The rhythm of the harp blends with the crackle of the embers. You sleep not in silence, but in a choir of memory, songs sung to fill the void of winter. The songs from the great hall fade at last, replaced by the quieter sounds of the castle shutting down. Footsteps retreat, benches scrape on stone, torches hiss as they burn low. Yet not everyone has the luxury of sleep. Somewhere above you or down the hall, faint thuds and rustles reveal the unseen figures who keep watch, not against enemies, but against fire. On the coldest nights, when hearths and braziers blazed hotter and longer than usual, the danger of flames spreading through the dry rushes and timber beams was constant. The fire kept you alive, but the fire could also destroy you. Historical ordinances from noble households mention explicit roles. Watchmen of the fire patrolled the halls after others had retired. Their duty was simple but vital: stir the embers, but never let them flare out of control. A single spark landing on the dry, herb-strewn rushes could transform a chamber into an inferno in minutes. Imagine their tired eyes scanning the floor, hands clutching buckets of sand or water, ears pricked for the faint crackle that might signal disaster. While you curled under your pelts, they fought a quieter battle against simple, devastating accidents. One well-documented fact is that many castles banned open flames in private rooms without supervision. Candles were precious, but also risky. Residents would snuff them before pulling their bed curtains shut, leaving only the guarded glow of a brazier. Picture yourself lying in near darkness, knowing that if a servant forgot his duty, you might wake surrounded by smoke. What may surprise you is how frequently fires did break out, despite these precautions. Chronicles are filled with descriptions of great halls gutted, roofs collapsing in sparks, and even entire fortresses ruined by a moment of carelessness. Survivors spoke of waking to shouts and choking fumes, stumbling through smoke-filled corridors. There's a curious anecdote from a 15th century account. A knight, half drunk from a feast, kicked over a candle as he fumbled toward his bed. His chamber nearly ignited, and only the quick thinking of his servants who doused the rushes saved him. Archaeological studies of charred beams found in castle ruins confirm this ever-present hazard. Even a stone fortress depended on wooden floors, ceilings, and roofs. Fire was both comfort and curse, survival and threat. As you lie beneath your pelts, you imagine those unseen figures walking softly outside your chamber. You hear the faint scrape of a poker against logs, the shuffle of boots on rushes. Their presence is invisible, yet essential. Your dreams depend on their alertness. On the coldest nights, when the fires burn brightest, safety rested not only in walls and weapons, but in the servants who guarded your slumber from the very element meant to save you. The quiet tread of the fire watch fades, leaving only the faint glow of embers in your chamber. You sigh into your furs, feeling the warmth close about you. But your thoughts linger on another truth. Not every bed in this castle is equal. As you rest in your curtained cocoon, others are lying on pallets, benches, or even the bare floor. Hierarchy does not vanish at night. It shapes every layer of rest, dividing warmth from cold and softness from hardness. Documents from noble households often list bedding among their most prized possessions. Feather mattresses, fine wool blankets, and fur covers. These luxuries cascaded downward in rank. The lord claimed the finest goose down. A knight like yourself might accept a wool or straw bolster, and the servants managed with simple straw sacks. Imagine the contrast. You turning under embroidered covers, while a stable boy sleeps nearby on hay that crackles each time he shifts. The castle unites everyone under one roof, but within that roof sleep is tiered, just like the feasts in the great hall. One well-recorded fact is that feather mattresses were so valuable they often appeared in wills. The inheritance of bedding symbolized comfort as much as wealth. To own a feather bed was to possess not just a place to lie, but status itself. What may surprise you is that even the placement of the beds marked hierarchy. Nobles slept high in their solars, on the upper floors, sometimes closer to the heat rising from the great hall below. Servants and guards were often consigned to the lower, damper floors, where the frost seeped in more fiercely. There's a curious anecdote in a 15th century household account. A knight discovered his young page had snuck under his own covers during the night, seeking warmth from the boy's master. Rather than punishing him, the knight laughed and let the boy stay, remarking that rank matters less than frost. But this story survives precisely because it was so unusual. Most would never have dared cross such a line. Archaeological digs of castle remains uncover traces of straw bedding scattered in cold corners, far from the hearths. These were likely the spots where servants slept, out of sight and out of mind. The straw insulated poorly and offered a scratchy rest at best. You lie still, imagining the many sleepers scattered throughout the fortress tonight. In the solars, lords breathe softly under feather and fur. In shared chambers, knights curl against the drafts. In the servants' corners, boys shiver on straw, their cloaks pulled up to their noses. All dream beneath the same roof, but each experience is different, dictated by station. Medieval sleep was not just about cold or warmth. It was about inequality. The coldest nights only made those differences sharper. Some suffered, some endured, and some indulged. The castle breathes around you, some curled in feather beds, others shivering on straw. But even among the knights and nobles, the night was not uniform. Your own rest, wrapped in furs and scented linen, was shaped not only by your rank, but by who you are. A man, a warrior. In the chamber beside yours, perhaps, a lady of the household prepares for sleep in her own way. Gender, too, determined the rhythms of slumber. Contemporary sources reveal clear differences between how men and women experienced the coldest nights. Noble women often had their own solars, chambers hung with finer fabrics and guarded by female attendants. Their bedding could be lavish, embroidered covers, delicate linens, and perfume sachets stronger than any knight's. But alongside this luxury came restrictions. Women were rarely left entirely alone. Servants or companions often shared their chambers, both for warmth and for propriety. Imagine trying to drift into dreams while knowing a maid rustled in the corner, always watching. One well-documented fact is that childbirth, illness, and nursing shaped female sleep in ways a knight rarely considered. A lady might rise multiple times in the night to tend to her children, or remain half wakeful, listening for their cries. In household inventories, cradles appear right alongside the great beds, evidence that the nursery was often inside the chamber itself. While a knight fretted over drafts, a woman worried about the tiny body beside her, so fragile against the winter chill. What may surprise you is that some noble women were said to burn night lamps more frequently than men, leaving their chambers faintly lit through the darkness. This wasn't just for comfort, it was for safety. The flames soothed children and reassured attendants. Yet it also heightened the risk of fire, a paradox accepted for peace of mind. Scholars debate how much more comfortable women truly were. Some argue their solars, more carefully arranged, gave them better sleep. Others counter that their constant obligations, childbearing, domestic oversight, and religious devotions made their nights shorter and more restless. As you imagine it now, the castle divides itself. In your chamber, the scent of rosemary mingles with smoke. In hers, the air is touched with rose water, softer perhaps, but no less cold. Your worries are of drafts and armor. Hers are of children and household order. You close your eyes and think of these parallel lives. The castle is a hive of sleepers, yes, but not all share the same burdens. Both seek warmth, but each dreams differently. In the end, the cold cared nothing for these divisions. It pressed through the stone, through the silk, and through the fur, touching everyone. The thought of these parallel chambers, lords in solars, ladies under silk, servants on straw, draws your mind to one final truth. No one in this castle truly slept in silence. Beyond the wind and the footsteps, the fortress was alive with animals. Horses in the stables stamped and nickered. Dogs barked or growled in the great hall, and cats prowled freely, hunting mice in the storerooms.
A medieval knight never fully escaped the chorus of beasts. Chroniclers describe castles as bustling ecosystems. The Great Hall often doubled as a kennel, with hounds sprawled near the dying fire. Stables were built close to the walls, so the body heat of the horses radiated faintly into adjacent chambers. One fact frequently mentioned is that dogs in particular shared intimate space with knights. Hunting hounds were treasured, sometimes allowed to curl at the foot of the bed. They offered warmth, companionship, and protection. Picture a knight drifting into dreams while his greyhound's body pressed against his legs, both of them sighing into the same warmth. What may surprise you is that birds sometimes roosted within the chambers as well. Falcons, symbols of nobility, were kept indoors. Chronicles tell of prized falcons perched on stands beside their masters' beds, their feathers rustling in the dark. The idea of sleeping with a hunting bird just a few feet away seems strange, but it was a mark of status. A quirky anecdote comes from a 14th century French account. A knight's chamber was said to reek of horses because he insisted on keeping his prized stallion stabled directly beneath his solar, claiming he could sleep better when hearing it breathe. As you lie in your chamber, you can almost sense them. The thud of a hoof on wood, the rattle of a chain, the flutter of wings from a restless falcon. These sounds weave into your dreams, mixing with the crackle of fire and the whisper of wind. You are never alone, not only because of servants and guards, but because animals breathe with you in the same fortress. The castle is alive around you. Dogs snoring, horses shifting, servants shuffling, guards stamping. You sink deeper into the furs, and you realize that every detail, the curtains, the herbs, the rushes, the fire, the shared bodies, and the animals, all serve one simple goal: to survive until morning. Medieval sleep was never effortless. It was a patchwork of warmth stolen from the cold, order carved from discomfort, and ritual laid like armor against the long night. Household roles listed bedding alongside weapons, proof that a good night's rest was as vital as a sharp sword. Mornings would often reveal frost clinging to the bed curtains, even to the blankets themselves. The air so cold, your very breath crystallized. Sleep had been a reprieve, not a victory. As you lie in your chamber now, you feel the truth of this. Every layer is imperfect. Drafts still creep in. The brazier smokes faintly. A dog scratches at fleas. And the bell will ring again before dawn. Yet, despite it all, your breath slows, your body loosens, and sleep comes. Close your eyes one last time. The curtains hang heavy. The herbal pillow releases its fading scent. The pelts press down, weighty but protective. The castle holds you, imperfect but steadfast. You surrender to it, body and mind, knowing that dawn will come with frost on the windows and a new day of duties. Now, the story slows, and so does your breath. You've journeyed through the stone corridors and the curtained chambers. You felt the frost press at the shutters and heard the echoes of bells in the night. You have lain among furs, herbs, and prayers, surviving hour by hour.
Let your own body loosen, as if you were laying aside armor. Feel the blankets grow heavier, softer, pressing you deeper into your mattress. The drafts are far away now, only whispers fading at the edges of your thought. You are at rest, shielded in your own warm, modern cocoon. The air is still. Each sound you once noticed has melted into quiet. Your breath drifts slow and even, a rhythm older than any wall, older than any stone. You are safe. You are warm. Rest easy. The story has ended. The night is yours. Drift deeper and let the coldest castle night dissolve into your warmest dream. Good night.